G'day guys, I'm Mini War Painter. In this video I'm going to be attempting something a little more tricky in terms of tone selection whilst I paint the cloak to my Exalted Sorcerer. I'll catch you after the intro. Part 3. The Cloak. So here he is guys, my second Exalted Sorcerer, and as you can tell I've been very busy since my last video. Here you can see another great example to the finish you can achieve with the Gold Series paint set by Scale 75, which if you didn't know I've done a review on, which you can check out on my channel. I've also taken the principles of my previous video and applied them again to the warm white ribbons that flow off his chest plate, and same again to the underside of his cloak. But now let's take a look at what this video is all about. During this video I'm going to be looking at painting a two-tone part to the outer side of his cloak, using a reddy purple which I based him with already, and a dark purple which I'm going to develop towards the bottom area of his cloak. This is going to be tricky to achieve because when it comes to highlighting and shading these areas, I'm going to need to play with my wet palette to see which tones to use that will complement both grades of colour, so there's inevitably going to be some mistakes. This process is called trial and error, something I advise in getting used to. So first I'm going to begin glazing with a 1-to-1 mixture of Naggaroth Night and Screamer Pink. Naggaroth Night is a big jump from Screamer Pink, which explains the mix. Anything to help build that smooth transition we all want. It's worth the time and effort to mix a few colours together first. Be sure to add enough water to transform its properties into a glaze. Then with a nice clean brush, just soak a small amount of the pigment into the bristles. I like to gauge the strength using my thumbnail, which in this case I agree is quite strong, but we'll get away with it because of how close to my base coat I've made it by mixing. What I'm going to do now is apply this along the lower half of the cloak, making sure to stroke the brush downwards towards the hem, where I want the pigment to be strongest. At this stage I'm not considering any areas that would be darker or lighter. This in theory is still part of my base coat stage. Shading and highlighting will come later. Remember, the trick to glazing is to make sure you allow the previous layer to dry fully before the next. Although I'm only showing you a couple of passes, I carried out at least 4 layers of this glaze, dropping my start point about 1mm for each layer. Once happy with the coverage, it's time to go pure Naggaroth Night. It's important to get a very thin glaze at this stage because of how strong the dark tone is compared to our previous glaze. Not watering it down enough will cause a patchy result as you begin dragging around too much pigment on the surface area of the cloak. You should notice the lower down I've become on the cloak when applying this glaze, as I attempt to leave my previous glaze efforts still showing. Like before, although I show you a couple of passes, this stage required at least 5 layers of glazing in order to get the smooth transition up to a strong dark purple. And with that final layer dried, you can see how intense that purple looks when next to Screamer Pink. It's said that within the 1,000 suns, the more purples and reds a model has, denotes his position in the ranking structure, leaving Magnus the Red at the top with his overpowering red skin. But naturally, because I'm not quite a level 61 fiddling brushmaster, I need to glaze over the 2 transitions again with some Screamer Pink, just to help smooth out any inconsistencies I may have developed from glazing down. Notice now the direction I'm glazing with Screamer Pink, aiming to draw the pigment upwards to where it belongs. Sometimes this can be tricky and fiddly to achieve because of other aspects of the model hindering your brush. Something worth thinking about when you come to plan ahead before starting a project, so you can avoid these struggles if and when you choose to glaze. With the base coat finally completed, it's time to shade down. I imagine this stage to be a bit of a brain buster trying to determine which tones to use that will suit my 2-part base tone, but fortunately the deeper recesses fall more within the dark purple areas, so I settled with a glaze of Incubi Darkness. Brush direction is still important here, as I try to direct the pigment into the valley of the folds. Some folds are more shallow than others, in which case I've tried to run the small puddle of pigment off the edge of the cloak. Be wary that pigment may take longer to dry in the recesses as it pulls up, but don't be tempted to soak it up either, as this too can leave you with a patchy result which will annoy the hell out of you. You'll just have to give it a little more time to dry. With that stage completed, the shape of the cloak is beginning to look more defined. I wish I could leave it at this stage, but I have to learn for myself how to highlight tricky surfaces like these if I ever want to improve, so get ready to take note of my mistakes.
Are you all my personal dreams?
So my first idea was to glaze in some highlights over both transitions with pink horror, thinking that this colour would tint the dark tones just fine. You can see by the application to my thumbnail, it's a very weak glaze. Yet, as I apply it over both surfaces, it applies very patchy and obvious, which tells me that I'm going to have to do some mixing first. So my next attempt was to add a blob of Screamer Pink into my pink horror and go at it again.
Are you all my personal dreams?
I applied this over a wider area of each fold and a further more layers over the areas I fudged up earlier with pink horror, in order to bring down its harsh presence. This worked to a certain degree, but I only applied this to the Screamer Pink half of the cloak, with the idea to add in some Naggaroth Night into the mix to glaze the darker purple highlights. Once I'd finished this glaze, I was feeling better about my previous cock-up. With Naggaroth Night, I added a blob into the previous Screamer Pink horror mixed, to then add a glaze to the darker purple areas. Once completed, I then went back to Pink Horror and glazed this again on the higher folds of each ripple, focusing the pigment this time over the Screamer Pink areas. Once again, the Pink Horror has made it look a bag of shit. So I took some Screamer Pink and glazed over the areas again, hoping to bring down the strength of the highlights. Remember guys, if there's anything you don't like, you can always go back to your previous tone and start again. When those glazes dry, you can still make out some subtle highlights from when I glazed over the pink horror with Screamer Pink. But although it may look good, it's not quite Carlin. So I thought of only one person who could help me and dropped Darren Latham a message. He advised me to attack these two-tone highlights by mixing the two base tones together and using blue horror rather than pink horror to increase the highlight, because pink horror was too pink for both tones. After applying this highlight, although the tones suited both base colours a lot better, I felt I jumped the gun a little with blue horror and record Darren's advice starting with a glaze of just both the base colours mixed first. So I went back over the areas again using the glaze of this mixture, aiming to avoid covering too much of the previous highlight, with the goal to make things transition better between tones. Once happy, I then added a little more blue horror to the original mix, just to glaze in some final highlights. And with that final stage completed, it was done. I must say this is definitely something I'm going to need more practice on, working with a multi-tone base coat and working out the best approach towards highlights and shading. On that note, if you've ever had any experience yourself dealing with a similar challenge, drop me a message below. or even if you had any ideas yourself that you feel would benefit me or the rest of the audience. I'm as much interested as hearing from you guys on your thought process towards painting minis as much as I am sharing with you mine. So don't be shy to get in touch. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you've anything to add, please don't hesitate to comment down below. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at miniwar_painter. Here you can follow my progression as I like to post regularly on my stories. Don't forget to subscribe and don't be shy to mix those paints. Ta-ra!